And now on the line is Barry Dempsey from the Dún Laoghaire Rathdown Drug and Alcohol Task Force. Barry, welcome to the programme.
Thanks very much, Darren. Thanks for having me.
Okay, cool, yeah. Barry, a couple of years ago I interviewed Janet Robinson from the Blanchardstown Local Drug and Alcohol Task Force, and you are the second person I would have interviewed from one of the task forces. Could you tell me a bit about the history of your task force, please, and about the work that you do with them today?
Okay, well, the work I do with the task force today, so we'd be a project funded under the local drug and alcohol task force based in the Dún Laoghaire Rathdown region. It was originally set up under the pillars of the national drug strategy to sort of have an account for various arms. So under the supply and reduction pillar, there would have been a task force established for that. And then under the education pillar and the prevention pillar, and there would have been just various sort of task forces established to be able to ensure that key performance indicators are met and the on-the-ground work, so to speak, would be achieved. So the Dún Laoghaire Rathdown task force that our project would be funded under has been developed to have a preventative sort of approach. So that would be under the current national drug strategy, which is entitled Reducing Harm, Supporting Recovery. The preventative aspect would be quite big in that at the moment, of looking at the sort of prevention is better than cure. So that's where my project would come under the microscope there, and that's hopefully what we're going to talk about today and just see how that's kind of come about.
Are you allowed to name the organisation you work for?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's in transition at the moment. We've gone through a strategic plan, and it's the neighbourhood, the old name is sort of the Neighbourhood Youth and Family Project, based in Monkstown Farm. And we're trying to sort of establish a new name and a rebranding to kind of move along with the times. It's sort of an old project which has its roots in the community, which has been very, very successful and very effective. But in order to come under the funding streams that would sort of pay our salaries, we need to be able to achieve some different sort of perspectives and parameters under the drug task force. So we need to kind of change the name and move with the times a little bit.
Okay, and to talk about alcohol and illegal drug abuse in your area, could you tell me how significant the problem is where you work? You just mentioned there you work in Monkstown. Like, I don't know Monkstown well. I've been there a few times, and I think the only times I've been there is visiting Kiltory Aaron, you know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought there was a big problem over it. Well, I don't know, but can you tell me anyway what the story is? Like?
Yeah, I mean, that's often, I think, one of the misconceptions or whatever is that it is Southside Dublin. It's kind of a leafy suburb. There's a pocket within a lot of areas in Dublin, in Ireland, which does have sort of nearly like, I'd call it nearly like the land that sort of time forgot. It's just a little quadrant where there used to be sort of a lot of social housing. It used to be flats. It was probably a poorly served kind of area of the community, and consequently I think it kind of got ravaged by the heroin epidemic that took over Dublin in the 80s, and it just kind of never really recovered. And since then there's probably been just a pattern of intergenerational drug abuse sort of within the same family. There's probably a little bit of, you know, the lower socio-economic end. There's been sort of employment struggles, housing crisis hasn't helped, the recession hasn't helped, and I think a lot of the residents there have found it just quite hard to engage in services, and there's probably a lot of poor school retention for young people as well, and a lot of absenteeism. There's quite a high crime rate, and obviously drugs are at the centre of it as well. So that's probably describes kind of our community where we're at and the work that we're trying to do. And yeah.
Okay. In the other interviews I have done on legal and illegal drug abuse in the last few years, I've been told that alcohol and cannabis are the two biggest problem drugs in Ireland. Is this your experience in your area also?
Yeah, absolutely. It's recently changed from, you know, alcohol would have probably been like your sort of universal one that young people would have been able to access quite readily. That thankfully has changed a little bit, And what we're seeing now, the trends are that weed is probably more readily available than ever, and young people are kind of taking to weed nearly quicker than they would have to alcohol. I think the recent stats are like that alcohol use among teenagers has actually dropped off for the first time in a good number of years. Now, I don't really know how much credit I could really give that, because there's a notorious binge drinking culture among the teenagers that we would work with, but it's morphing into what we call polydrug use. So that's more than one substance at a time. So that's now alcohol and cannabis, or that's now cannabis and sort of your ecstasy, which is MDMA. So there's different kind of trends depending on the different ages, but it's alcohol wouldn't be as much of the problem as it used to be, but it's still there nevertheless. And I think alcohol just opens up a whole world of people think they can do what they want. You know, it's a disinhibitor. People would put themselves at more risk. They're more inclined to pick up charges under the influence of alcohol, but they're more inclined to pick up other drugs as well at the same time. And that's when the problem really, really starts.
We'll come back to cannabis in a couple of minutes, just to talk a bit more about alcohol abuse. Am I right in saying that you and your organisation would be big supporters of the public health alcohol bill coming in?
Yeah, we would absolutely. It's part of the demographic and the youth culture that we have, that any sort of reduction on sale and supply, even if it seemed to be sort of prohibitionist, if you will, is probably for the younger ones, and I'm talking kind of like 10, 11, 12, who lose the run of themselves at Halloween, and there's absolutely nothing that can be done. I mean, we'd have squad cars out at the bonfire. You can't really contain these young lads or young girls. Like once they're absolutely like full to the gills of drink, it's just a war zone. So in restricting the availability, which I'm not 100% sold on myself as a practitioner, I would use a lot of harm reduction and meeting the person where they're at to sort of engage them at that level and talk about their drink or their drug use. But the public alcohol bill is just something that I guess, you know, it's probably time for kind of more drastic measures as well, and looking at that, like, I suppose in sort of in real terms at the minute, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you that we need to go further. You didn't mention there one thing that probably one of the biggest things I love about this bill that's hopefully coming in soon is that it's going to be restrictions on alcohol advertising. I think that's great, but I think it should go further personally. I think they should ban alcohol advertising with sport 100%. You know what I mean? I don't know if you agree with that. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
No, look, I would. I mean, I think we all kind of grew up when, you know, you're watching the snooker nearly, and you know, Steve Davis is sitting around and Alex Higgins are sitting around and they're smoking and they're drinking their way through it, and that was probably a normalisation for a lot of us growing up. But I think as the teenager nowadays evolves, I think our psyche needs to evolve with it, in that they're more of a risk-taking generation. They're more sort of not really listening to the things that we would have had kind of growing up, like the morals and the values and the beliefs of our parents. And it was a different time, and I think we probably need to take stock of that right now. And yeah, alcohol sponsoring at major events. I think there just needs to be a push towards more pro-social things, just a bit of a cleaner life, and just sort of like, yeah, move away from that. So absolutely, sporting events, yeah, definitely. I don't think that's probably the place for it, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that assuming the public health alcohol bill comes in, that it's a great start for addressing the issue of alcohol abuse in Ireland, I think, you know.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
Yeah, to talk a bit about cannabis abuse in Ireland, I interviewed Dr. Bobby Smith recently about it, and we had a long, informative interview on the subject. To give another summary to our listeners, Barry, can you tell us why the use of this drug is such a big challenge to deal with?
Yeah, I'd heard your piece with Bobby, and I definitely revere him in the field. I think he's definitely one of the leading figures, and really knows his stuff, specifically when it comes to adolescence as well, because that would be sort of my field as well. It's probably a misconception that cannabis is this, you know, footloose and fancy-free drug that has been around since the dawn of time. everybody smokes it allegedly, according to teenagers, and it's never done anyone any harm. Bob Marley, flags, all this kind of, that's very much a false sense of security when a young person comes to you with, look, it's legal in Holland, it's pretty much legal in nearly every state now. There's very much a lack of awareness around the different types of weeds that there is out there at the moment now, specifically not really cannabis, like the resin. I'm talking about the actual, like, the marijuana end of things. That's where the real chemicals get introduced. And I think if somebody in America on medicinal marijuana were to smoke the weed that's available on the street in Dublin, I'd say they'd probably have some sort of psychotic breakdown. And likewise, if one of the teenagers over in Dublin were to smoke the medical licensed marijuana, they would probably get no high off it whatsoever. So there's a big kind of difference in terms of the damage that it causes for young people, and the aggression levels that we're seeing are off the scale. Concerned parents, concerned sort of relatives are just saying, look, I don't know my son anymore, I don't know my daughter anymore. The aggression is off the charts, and something needs to be done, because they don't seem to recognise who the addict is anymore. And it has gone down to pure addiction because of the chemicals that are being laced into weed and being sprayed with. It's amphetamine. There's even been traces of heroin found by an organisation, a charity called The Loop over in the UK. They're a drug analysing charity, and they usually go around festivals, and you can get your drugs analysed, not as a, get a better high, but to know what you're taking, to know what you're putting into your body. And they've actually seen traces of cocaine and pure ecstasy, like MDMA, and amphetamine, so speed, and then a little bit of heroin as well. So, like, everything is being put into weed these days. And it's probably to engineer the physical addiction to the drug so that you'll come back, you'll get more, and the dealer will make a lot more money off it as well. But the age of use is just getting younger and younger. I mean, I said earlier on with the alcohol, it's 10, 11-year-olds. It's the same with weed. It's experimenting at such a young age. But the brain is so delicately forming that, psychosis, drug-induced psychosis, and psychosis in general gets triggered a lot earlier. And as someone grows up, if they don't kind of deal with the addiction at a very early stage, that can just have massive consequences. And the paranoia and the mental health issues and the self-harming that goes with it. It's definitely pretty scary to see some of the kids and how they present. It's not what it used to be at all, and it's changing quite rapidly as well. So that would be a very worrying factor.
Yeah, I was saying to Dr. Bobby Smith when I interviewed him there recently as well that when I was a teenager for 4 years, I smoked cannabis. It would have been hash now, but
right.
I know hash is addictive as well, but grass or marijuana, whichever you want to call it, is a lot more addictive. Is that true? Isn't it?
Yeah, it would be. There's probably another, the sort of, there's a term like when people would go into like a rehab, there's, the heroin addicts would look down on the alcoholics, and the alcoholics would look down on the heroin users, and it's kind of like, well, at least I'm not injecting into my arm. And then, there's this sort of hierarchical thing where people think, at least I'm not doing that. But like even in weed smokers, they, cannabis smokers would be a different kind of person to a weed smoker. Cannabis is seen to be a little bit more benign. It seemed to be a little bit more, you can trust it a bit more. It hasn't got as many chemicals. It's still full of chemicals, but it hasn't got as many in it. And it's probably seen as a safer drug nearly. And you're less likely to have a psychotic episode because you smoke cannabis than you are smoking weed. So someone who comes out of residential treatment would nearly be told, sure, just like don't go back on the weed, just smoke hash. And it's kind of like, well, that's not really going to work for you. Like, it's still a psychoactive substance, and it's still the same classification of drug, and it still carries the same risk. But it's probably seen in circles by people who smoke it as a little bit safer, But it wouldn't really be, that kind of way.
Dr. Bobby Smith was telling me recently that most of the people who get referred to his hospital for doing drugs is because of grass, like specifically, the vast majority of cases, it isn't hashish or hash, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's grass. So, like, are there actually many young people getting admitted to hospital nowadays because of this? Like,
the admissions to hospital would probably be a little bit further down the track in terms of you'd probably find like a community organisation such as ourselves would be probably the first to kind of like come up against it, where like in school, for example, the school would be aware of it probably first, because the behaviour would be displayed during class. There'd be the aggression, throwing chairs around, leading to detention, leading to suspension, leading to sort of poor school attendance, coming in stoned, sort of. So a lad would typically want to smoke first thing in the morning, and they'd come in and you'd see the red eyes on them. And they'd be mellow and giggly for about an hour or two, and then when that wears off, it's kind of like the real true colours kind of shine through. So the school would be a great place to be able to flag that with you then, and obviously your school completion officers, and then maybe it goes as far as up to social work, but your parents would be in line there as well with sort of bringing concerns. So that's where it would come to the community first, and at the moment I'd be trying to get a young man into treatment down in Ashery in Kilkenny and Ballyraggis. It's a really, really good place for a teen rehab, and this young man I'd be trying to get in, it would be predominantly weed that he would be smoking, but he'd be mixing it with different substances, and just trying to get him around the idea of treatment at the moment is kind of a bit of a hard sell. But if he does go in, it would be the primary substance would be weed that he'd have to be detoxed off essentially, and given the core skills then to live kind of essentially without it for the rest of his life would be the hardest part. But yeah, community first, and then you'd be looking at your more serious hospital admissions and your treatment centres after that.
And the hospital admissions could come years later, even if you stopped using the drug, I think. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, John of God's and any hospital at the moment, like any kind of psychiatric wing of a hospital is full of this, what used to be kind of termed cannabis-induced psychosis. But we are just going to see, that is kind of like the tip of the iceberg analogy at the moment. What we're seeing is presentations of paranoia, depression, anxiety, and that is what you see right now. But in years to come, you're right, it's going to be a more different animal that we're going to see, and it's going to be a more entrenched, sort of more schizophrenia, personality disorder, all that sort of stuff. That's going to be coming too. So that's why we're in the preventative field anyway, as much as we can be. Yeah.
Yeah, like 20 years ago, when I was about 19, I stopped smoking hash. Like, I had side effects for I wasn't admitted to hospital because of it at the time. But I was going to say, like, what the difference you were saying with grass, but most people who are smoking marijuana nowadays, smoking grass, and Dr. Bobby Smith said to me recently as well, the difference between what's going on nowadays with young people and probably older people as well in their 20s or whatever, and what went on 20 years ago, it's unbelievable. It's very stark difference, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, there are complete contrasts. It's, I touched on before, it's the evolution of the teenager is changing, the risk-taking behaviour is there as well, and the evolution of, I think, the drug dealer and the supplier is changing. There's more of a, there's kind of that culture now where it's like, I know it was always there for a dealer to go, here's a bag, get back to me again, there's no fee on that, I'll get you later. They're still doing that, but because the stuff that they're giving young lads is so potent, and they are kind of so young, they just kind of really get hooked on it really quick, and then you're seeing the money goes missing around the house is usually the first thing. Possessions get sold, the groups of friends change. So like if any of your listeners are listening to any of that, they might be warning signs to look out for. Not being able to sort of stay in school for long periods of time, that's where it happens. And then eventually that's when the lads come knocking going, here, where's my money back? And usually families, these guys would prey on vulnerability of people. Like they don't choose people who have the money. They'll choose people who they can extort and intimidate, and whether it's going to be holding drugs yourself, or offering to put your windows in to sort of say, well, look, if you can't pay up, your windows are going to get done, or else here, maybe you go do a job for me and you can work the money off, and then you're into criminality at a young age, and you're putting a strain on Garda resources as well, with the juvenile liaison officers coming in. And then after that, then sure, look, if that doesn't work through the courts and the sort of Garda diversion programs don't work, well, then you're into, proper prison system. And the services just aren't there to treat young people at all. So once you go into that, it's nearly a one-way ticket as well, unfortunately. We just don't have the resources to deal there. So.
And are you having any positive results on cannabis use, like abuse?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your intervention, like your approach. So, I would be a firm believer in, as I said, like harm reduction. So you just engage with the teenager and just kind of go, right, okay, so, I'm not going to tell you drugs are bad. You know that. If you want to lose or, destroy a relationship with a young person, you just tell them or give them a lecture on something and tell them how bad it is. And then they'll just close off and that's it, done. But if you work with them in it's a thing called motivational interviewing. It's just, you listen to the person talking about what's good about the drugs and, why they like it. And eventually there's going to be some little source of an inroad where they might say, well, do you know what, it's actually really expensive. And then you go, right, well, talk to me about how expensive it is and how do you have the money, because you're only in school, you're not working. And then they might get into how they have to rob a bit of money or they borrow it. And then, then you start formulating an idea that, well, maybe this drug is not exactly as good as you say it is. And then they might go, I suppose you're right, actually. And then you might look at a way of, what could you do differently? And then it's, well, I could go back to playing football or something like that. I know that's a very idealistic picture for those who know about motivational interviewing, but for people who don't, it's painting a picture of what life could be like without the drug and highlighting the pitfalls. But you're letting the client or your teenager come up with them themselves rather than you forcing the issue. It's about them kind of, and going, do you know what, actually, yeah, that could be the way. And once they come to that conclusion themselves, then you've got motivation on your hands. Then you've got someone who's actually going, yeah, because it's their own thoughts rather than explaining to someone how drugs are bad. So that would be an intervention that I would use. And then there's also models of the community reinforcement approach as well, where you're looking at the family and you're looking at sort of protective factors within the community. So like getting them into like a sport, or the gym is usually a popular one with young lads, and just giving that time off the drugs as well. It's kind of like, well, look, do you want to try a day without smoking weed and let me know how you get on? And you try and push that to 2 days, 3 days. And you'll find actually that most people just end up becoming a slave to the drug. And they don't actually really want to, but it's just, they just think that that's the way it goes. And the concept of quitting seems really daunting. Even as a former ex-cigarette smoker myself, it was like, Jesus, when you got to quit, it's like, oh, how am I going to do this? But if you imagine life without a drug like that, you're kind of more like, okay, well, I can probably give this a shot and introduce a different behaviour. That's crucial. You can't just drop something, sit there and wait for the cravings to kick in, because that won't work. You need to adopt some new kind of thinking, and that's where like CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, that would work as well, really well, in terms of working with addiction too.
Yeah, when I was about 18, I was saying to you, I was about 19 when I stopped smoking hash. I also did ecstasy for about a year on the weekends. And I remember I went to a psychologist when I was 18. I only went to him a few times now. And then the first time I was talking to him, he said, okay, you'll be coming here next week. If you're going to be taking these drugs on the weekend, I did it other times as well, but he goes, he said to me to write out or type out on a piece of paper what I had taken and bring me into him the next week, And the next week I came in and I had written down, I took 3 or something ecstasy tablets, a bit of hash, and I had a few cans of beer. And then, like, I didn't really know what to expect him to say. And then he had to look at the sheet and he goes, how did you feel after taking them? over the next few days. And that was really,
Right.
it's an obvious question, but it was really profound to me, because
Yeah.
when I was taking them, I felt great, but the next day and for the next 5 days or whatever it was, I felt like in the pits of hell. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
I think intervention does make a big difference. And you were saying there you have motivational questioning or whatever it's called. I think I've never experienced that personally as a client, but it sounds like it could make a big difference. You know,
it's extremely powerful. Yeah, it's just, again, it's just kind of meeting the person where they're at. You're not being judgmental. You're not preaching. You're not talking down to them. You're just essentially having a chat, but you're constantly trying to edge them around to the idea that ultimately your end goal is probably drug free. But if you fall short of drug free, you've reduced the intake of the drug. So that in itself is progress, and that's kind of what the essence of it really is. And it's you know, you're never really going to fall out over it. You're never going to go too fast. You're letting the clients dictate the pace. So it's a very sort of like, if you could just picture it as, it's kind of like a waltz, you know, a slow waltz. It's kind of getting around the floor, but you know, not rocking the boat too much. Which, look, the criticisms are in that it can take a lot of time. But I think the best things do take time, and you need to be invested, and you need to go at someone's pace. You don't want to, you know, cut the line too soon, and you want to do it properly. Do you get me? Like, proper framework.
Are there many other people in your position providing this kind of intervention around Ireland? Do you know?
I couldn't give you numbers off the top of my head, but there was the sort of International Motivational Interviewing Conference there last summer in Croke Park, and that had about like a good 200 attendees. So it would be quite popular in the field. A lot of the big names in town would be using it in their outreach as well. It's popular with sort of outreach for drug users who really don't want to engage with services at all. You know, I'm talking about homeless, entrenched street drug users as well. Like a lot of the outreach workers would be equipped with those skills to come up to someone with that sort of harm reduction approach, where it's non-judgmental and you could possibly save their lives. So like the likes of Anna Liffey would use it a lot in their residential and their outreach centres as well, and that would be sort of what a lot of, like Dublin Simon as well, all of them would be sort of trained in that.
Yeah, I've interviewed Tony Duffin from Anna Liffey a couple of times, and all doing great work as well.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Are there any? We went into a lot of depth there talking about alcohol and cannabis, and you mentioned at the start some people are also doing ecstasy. Are there many other drugs you come across in your work?
Sort of MDMA, which is like your sort of pure ecstasy, is probably a big one now. It's coming up among young people, but also ketamine, the horse tranquilizer or whatever. That's something that a lot of people seem to like taking as well. That gives you this sort of out of body experience nearly, but I think when you take it, you feel one way, but to sort of see it from the outside, it actually looks very, very concerning how someone who's taking ketamine can present. And what else would be used? It's just be your sort of your tablets. But the big one would be cannabis at the minute. And cocaine use is obviously up now for the third year in a row. I think that's still on the up because people have a little bit more money, kind of. There's a bit more sort of disposable income or whatever you want to call it. People are kind of, they're going back to cocaine, and I think there's more people are seeking treatment for cocaine as well. So it's at the problematic stage. It's not just that. Well, some people might be using it like as a recreational thing at the weekends. There's a lot of people are getting kind of out of control on it quite quickly because I think the purity levels of cocaine are up a lot higher than they were previously. So it's a lot stronger. So people are feeling the effects more. They're getting sort of more addicted to it, need it more. And then cocaine wouldn't be a cheap drug either. So it would be quite hard to fund that as an addiction as well. So those would probably be, but you know, the way time goes on and the way, like, even periods during the year, like different drugs come in and out of the frame, depending on you know, availability as well. Like this, you know, if a shipment of something gets in, that's usually the kind of the street trend. something gets kind of cut up a little more than something else, then, you know, that goes into a bit of a decline, and then something else will pop in. So,
is there much use of benzos and crystal meth?
Yeah, I was talking to an ambulance, one of the sort of the Dublin Fire Brigade paramedics, and I was asking him about the crystal meth, and he said it's not as bad as I think they thought it was going to be. And I was quite surprised at that, because I think you take one hit of crystal meth and that's you. You're on the crystal meth train from then on. So I was quite surprised to see that would ravage you as well. Like that's, you know, I think everyone's probably seen the scary pictures of crystal meth. Like that totally just, in a very, very short space of time, will just decay your body and your soul effectively. But that's not as big as I don't think people thought. And the other one you asked was benzos. Yeah, benzos are always they're always there in the background. I mean, somebody just binges too much on cocaine or a bad batch of MDMA, they're just going to need a load of benzos then to kind of come down off it. And yeah, they're always going to be there, and they're hard to detox from as well. Yeah, very hard.
Just to give you a brief illustration from my time 20 years ago when I was a teenager doing drugs, I did cannabis for 4 years, fairly regularly, but I did ecstasy for about a year on the weekends. And I know it was hash now, it wasn't grass. But the damage that I experienced from cannabis, I experienced more kind of damage in the space of a year doing ecstasy once a week than cannabis in 4 years. And I mean, I wasn't admitted to hospital, but touch wood. Well, I didn't need to go, but the ecstasy are fierce damage drugs, I know that. And the other one is cocaine. I tried it once, and I had to go to work the next Monday, and the side effects I had in work the following Monday for a couple of days, they were so bad it scared me to do it again. I was better off, but and at the time I didn't have a lot of money, and I wasn't in that kind of circle doing cocaine. But it just goes to show you that, like, I know, like, I'm not trying to say one drug's worse than another. I know grass or marijuana is fierce damaging, but cocaine, ecstasy are fierce damaging as well, aren't they?
Yeah, no, they are. And again, going back to the sort of the festival circuit that we've had this summer here in Ireland, again, like, you know, a lot of drugs, you know, festivals seems to be the thing. You know, drugs are quite easy to get into festivals. Let's be honest. I mean, alcohol's a lot harder to get into a festival if you're bringing in like a bottle of vodka or whatever. But drugs, they're easily concealed, and they get sold for quite a good profit, because the person who smuggled them in obviously can say, well, come here, I'm not just smuggling these in. So price goes up, and there's definitely a demand for it. So I think this summer as well in England, there was batches of kind of MDMA going around, but they would have been like bad batches, or it's this stuff called N-ethyl pentalone, I think it's called, which is like a very strong version of MDMA. But the come down that the sufferer or the user or whatever experiences could be up to 36 hours of no sleep coming down off that, and they go through intense paranoia, intense rage, intense depression. And then you probably throw that in with your average life stressors, like maybe they're in school, or maybe they've got college deadlines, or maybe they've got stuff going on at home, social media pressure, because that's kind of something that young people are really experiencing nowadays as well. Maybe it's bullying on social media, or, you know, wanting to look good or seem like you've got the best life. And then you find people really find it hard to cope, and that's when the self-harm comes in, and then that feeds the whole cycle again. Do they reach for a substance to try and cope? And then the circle sort of, you know, starts up again, and then it ends up like this merry-go-round from hell is probably the only way to describe it. So, yeah, you know, drugs, the ones that are out there now as well, especially, like, the side effects that the new stuff that's coming out, you know, they're absolutely brutal. But a lot of people don't really know about them. They just think, oh, that was a bad dose. But it's not, and that's where I'd be advising for Anna Liffey to do their, you know, they were down at Electric Picnic, and they had their harm reduction tent, and they were giving out leaflets saying, look, obviously don't do drugs, but if you are going to do drugs, at least try and make sure that you would maybe take a quarter of pill first and, drink a lot of water. And then if you think it's safe, maybe go for a little bit more. But, that's why if we could get something like a drug testing facility on site at festivals, lives would be spared, lives would be saved. You'd be able to know what the stuff is being cut with, because people just tend to go, come here, any pills. They don't ask the question about, who's your dealer, where'd you get it, what's the high, how strong is it? And now there's things like, there's a website called Pill Checker, and I'd be advising people to even just check on that, because, people will put up, look, there's this blue pill going around with a skull and crossbones on it, or whatever it is. Stay away from that, because I was in an absolute heap for a week. So it's probably about knowing what you're taking as well. But
I remember 20 years ago doing ecstasy for a year on the weekends. The most common ones, I don't know if they're still a producer, called Mitsubishis, and there was the so-called chunky ones and the normal ones. But the chunky ones were a lot more powerful, and they're really common. The most common one at the time, I think. And but the side effects of them were terrible. You know what I mean? Like, really put you into hell. You know what I mean? But, what I was going to say is, what you're saying there about life when you're doing drugs, I think, and years later after I stopped doing illegal drugs, I had a drink problem off that as well, several years as well. But I think if you're abusing drugs like alcohol or illegal drugs, like, life is difficult enough as it is if you're sober, and if you're abusing drugs, life becomes impossible, and you either have to change for the positive, or you stay stuck in that vicious cycle where things only get worse. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Okay, in an ideal world, coming towards the end of our interview, in an ideal world, how would you like to view the issues of alcohol and illegal drug abuse? Because I think there are always going to be people who do drugs, use drugs, you know what I mean?
There are, of course. Ideal world, like kind of magic wand, sort of, ideally, is it?
Yeah.
It's probably
do you think it should be legalized, for example? That kind of other stuff?
I mean, if it's, the legalization debate is one to be had probably at a later stage. But if you look at other countries, I mean, especially Portugal, you look at what they've done in terms of decriminalization. So it's kind of like the drug is still illegal, but the person who's taking it, or the user, or the addict, isn't criminalized anymore over there. So we've lost the war on drugs. The war on drugs has not worked for a very, very, very long time. I mean, you look at America and their war on drugs, and they just have prisons full to the brim of people who have been convicted of drug crime and trafficking and using. And we need to adopt a different modality, because what Portugal have managed to do is they've reduced drug deaths, they've increased money into the economy, into their own economy. The taxpayer money is actually going towards treatment, it's going towards education, it's going towards, meeting with people when, if you're caught with a certain amount, you get brought over, instead of being brought in front of a judge and there's a trial and there's all this, it's actually there's nearly a sort of a social care worker nearly sort of sitting down, and an addiction counsellor sitting down with you and going, well, look, maybe we need to talk about your drug use. Is it out of control? Or that's the way I see it. It's like decriminalization, and again with the harm reduction angle, that's a way to go forward. And I know people, obviously this has its criticisms from people going, are you just saying what, just let everybody just use drugs? Not exactly, but if everybody is using sort of safer drugs and not illegal drugs, like in America, the way they've got a control on the market, and licensed dispensaries are selling this medical grade marijuana, that's the way to control it. That's taking the power and the money and the corruption and the criminality away from dealers, and that's probably the way forward, because what we've done hasn't worked to date at all. And our prison system can't cope, and we haven't got the treatment in our prison system. If we did, or if we were able to reduce the supply of drugs coming in, oh, well be it. If you're going to police it that intensively, fair enough, but we haven't got that capacity at all. So you need to meet the person where they're at the other end of it. that's why I'd be quite hopeful that this drugs strategy is, supporting recovery. It's actually looking at the person in a humane way and saying, well, let's tackle the root of your addiction and let's look at it that way, rather than just punishing, penalising, and dealing with it that way. It just hasn't really worked.
I know from interviewing Dr. Bobby Smith a few weeks ago, he was saying that he was kind of inferring that he'd be in favour of decriminalisation once there's a sanction. And I mean, as you were saying in Portugal or whatever, I think personally that makes total sense. I think you should do that. But so you saying you'd actually go further and illegal drugs, you'd actually be in favour of them being legalised, would you?
I don't know if it's, is national level, away, are we aware of what that could look like? I don't think we're there yet. So I think we should probably just tone that down a little and look at what would make sense, is achievable, is feasible, and maybe go with a model that has worked. Try and incorporate something like that. Again, Annalise, you're leading the charge over here in terms of drug policy reform. It's a momentum that's gathering some steam, and there's serious negotiation with policymakers going on there, and we're hopeful that there's going to be a bill that'll be passed in the next kind of like short space of time within the life of this national drug strategy that we have at the moment. So that's until sort of 2024, I think it is. So that's where things are going. But legalizing it is probably another debate. But it's probably just, look, I mean, even in the home, as far as even if a parent can talk to their son or daughter about, hey, what's the story going on now with drugs in school, or do you have any idea? It's even about like opening up the channels of communication, even at home, and that's something that could even change the mindset about drugs in this country. That's that needs to happen as well. It's about people kind of connecting with each other and seeing where everyone's at. I think that's kind of the message that would need to be spread as well.
Sorry to keep you, I don't want to keep you all day. I know you're still officially at work, but you touched on a couple of something there a couple of times at the start of the interview and a few minutes ago about America. In a lot of states in America now, cannabis is legal. You can buy it in whatever shops or whatever you buy it. And you said it at the start of the interview. So you're saying that the cannabis that you buy over there legally in those states is a lot kind of weaker than the cannabis that's available on the street in Ireland, is it? Yeah.
No, definitely it is. It's approved. They've sort of a certain amount of the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the sort of psychoactive ingredient, which has that stoned feeling. And they've got the balance of the CBD, which is the sort of the oil that's kind of proven really popular over here now. It's the sort of the good side of the plant, which doesn't have any hallucinogenic, psychoactive substances. It's what people are using to like sleep and relieves anxiety. It's good for osteoporosis. It's good for like a whole host of conditions. And over there, they're able to sell this stuff if they have a license. Yeah, they're able to sell this to sort of multiple sclerosis patients and cancer sufferers and. But it is
the average person who wants to buy them as well. That's over 18 or 21.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot. I don't even know how many states it is, but there seems to be a new state every couple of weeks. A new state is just kind of like granted this and passed it, and it's now legalized as well. So, but it in terms of it, just probably is a complete contrast to what is being sold and what is being nearly genetically engineered over here. Kind of isn't really weed. It's this form of like skunk or super skunk. It's this stuff that is predominantly, it's just a load of chemicals wrapped up, and because it looks and smells like weed, that's what it's being sold as. But it's just a very, very dangerous concoction of chemicals. And the difference between what they have over there and the stuff that they would have in Amsterdam as well, I think obviously you can get your high grade THC, your stuff that would probably like blow your mind, but the stuff over here would just be people are spraying whatever they want on it, and they're cross breeding different strains of plants, and they're coming up with Frankenstein essentially is what they're kind of growing. And young kids just think it's terrific. The more out of their head they're getting, the better, but they just don't realise what the consequences down the road are going to be. And it's actually, even in the short term, that's the bad part. Like, even in the short term, they're having a lot of difficulty. But as a young person, I don't think, as a young male especially, you can't really connect the behaviour to the consequence. You know, it's a very hard path to learn that if you keep smoking this, you're going to be involved in dropping out of school, and then where are we going to put you? Oh, you're going to be kicked out of your house eventually, and then where are you going to go? You know, it's hard to get a 13-year-old, 14-year-old to join those dots and to sort of paint that picture as to, you know, you're making choices here that are really going to have lasting consequences. But I think at the age of 12, 13, your job as being a teenager, or from 13 up or whatever, your job as a teenager, and you're invincible. And that's unfortunately what you're kind of dealing with. You're battling with someone they're not blessed with that gift of foresight, because you know, the brain physically hasn't developed the concept of consequences. That's why people think teenagers can be stupid, because they just haven't learned the art of consequences yet. So add in some drugs and you've got the perfect recipe for disaster.